To get an early start on spring planting in our Zone 5 garden, we begin planting cool weather crops in February, both outside under cover and indoors in our grow room. Today I'll share what we planted in February and look ahead to what we'll plant in March. I'll also let you know when you can start planting cool weather crops where you live. Let's start with what we planted outside. Even though we planted everything under double cover, it's still much too cold for frost-sensitive plants. So everything we planted, including carrots, peas, lettuce, spinach, and radishes, can handle a frost and should do fine under cover at this time of year. For a clear picture of where I planted cool weather crops in February, let's look at the garden layout I first shared with you in early January. I planted carrots, radishes, spinach, and lettuce in this bed, which is the one I was resting my hand on in the previous clip. And I planted sugar snap peas along the north edge of this bed. Both beds are protected with double-layered low tunnels and are located on the north side of the garden, which gets more sun at this time of year. Even without protection, all of these crops could be started outside before our last frost date of April 27th, but double cover allows us to start them a couple months earlier. The 2 layers of 6mm greenhouse plastic create a microclimate in Zone 5 that is similar to Zone 8. This allows me to plant crops in February that I would otherwise plant in early April. Before planting, I added a thin layer of vermicompost from our indoor worm bins to the soil surface. When plants are established, I'll also add organic mulch like leaves and grass clippings. Other than watering, I won't do anything else to feed the soil or the plants. I started my planting with Danvers half-long carrots. I tried to use the square-foot garden spacing of 16 plants per square foot, but the seeds are small and I sometimes dropped too many. That's okay, because I can always thin them later if I need to. Next I planted French breakfast and white icicle radishes, again using the square-foot garden spacing of 16 per square foot. I then planted spinach and lettuce in nooks and crannies, without being too concerned about spacing. I like to plant greens closer than recommended, and then thin them as needed by harvesting baby greens. I finished my outdoor February planting by sowing sugar snap peas in this bed. I planted about 8 peas per square foot in a zigzag pattern along the north edge of the bed. This spring, when the cover is removed and the plants are tall enough to need support, I'll install trellises for them to climb. After planting, I thoroughly watered the beds. Though I didn't water the winter garden at all in December and January, we now have more than 10 hours of daylight and plant growth has resumed. My rule of thumb for watering in winter is to only water when there are 10 or more hours of daylight, and I don't expect nighttime temps under double cover to drop below freezing. With temperatures gradually rising, our cool weather crops won't require double cover much longer. So later this month, when temperatures are no longer expected to dip that much below freezing, we'll remove 1 layer of cover. And in April, when there are no freezing temperatures in the extended forecast, we'll remove the 2nd layer of cover. We'll also vent as needed to prevent overheating. Now let's take a look at what I planted indoors in February. I started lettuce, kale, collards, onions, leeks, and celery in the grow room in February. I could have started everything except celery outside under cover, but I should get earlier harvests by starting these crops indoors and transplanting them out later in March and April. I started all of the crops in small cells using a potting mix of 5 parts coconut coir, 4 parts perlite, and 3 parts vermicompost from our worm bins. I covered the cells with a plastic top to encourage germination and remove the top after germination. I also top watered before germination and bottom watered after. I keep the plants a couple inches under the grow lights, which are on 14 hours a day. The lettuce I started in early February is already being hardened off and will be transplanted into the garden under cover in mid-March. Depending on the weather, the collards, kale, leeks, and onions will be transplanted in late March or early April, and the celery will be transplanted into the garden after our last frost. So that's everything I planted in February. Now let's take a look at our March planting schedule. In mid-March, about 6 weeks before our last frost, I'll start basil, eggplants, peppers, and tomatoes in the grow room. and carrots, more peas, and potatoes under single cover outside. To encourage sprouting, the seed potatoes are chitting in a south-facing window for 6 weeks prior to planting. To keep our costs down this year, most of our seed potatoes were saved from last year's harvest or purchased from an organic grocer. Finally, in late March to early April, I'll plant raspberries and gooseberries directly in the garden. I'll be back in a few weeks with an update on our March planting and also a look forward to what we'll be planting in April. But rather than just share what I'm doing, I'd like to remind you of a tool you can use to determine spring planting dates in your area for a wide variety of crops, based on your average last frost date. This is the same tool I'm using to determine planting dates here. To use the tool, simply follow the link in the description below and select File Make a Copy or File Download as Microsoft Excel to make your own copy of the tool. You won't be able to use the tool if you don't make your own copy. Next, select the worksheet that applies to you. Are you growing with no cover, single cover, or double cover? Then enter your average last frost date here. This date can easily be found online. After entering this date, you'll see the planting dates for a wide variety of crops. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more videos on how to grow a lot of food on a little land without spending much or working harder than you have to.